Over the past 40 years, people are now working longer hours for less money because really employers are stealing your time.
Absolutely. They're stealing your time and they're not compensating you for it. Well, let's talk a little bit about how overtime works in this country.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, if you are an hourly employee, you qualify for overtime, which is to say, if you work more than 40 hours a week, you're going to get time and a half. As you pointed out, Goldie, you're making $20 an hour. If you're working more than 40 hours, for every hour you work beyond 40, you're going to get paid $30, right? That's pretty good. That's a good exchange. It makes it feel like it's worth it for me to stick around a few extra hours because the boss asked me to. That's great.
Right.
What we've had is there's been a schism between the hourly employee and the salaried employee. Salaried employees, for the most part, have stopped making overtime. We stopped paying them overtime. We held this threshold. We set a threshold that said, hey, if you make above this amount, you should not get overtime. The reasoning at the time was if you made a healthy amount of money from your boss should be able to ask you to work more time. But we're talking in the beginning of this whole thing, we're talking a tiny percentage of salaried employees were not covered by overtime. Nearly 70% of people were covered by overtime, even as a salaried employee. We lost that principle sometime in the 1970s. We've held it really flat since then. So if you are a salaried employee, you probably think you are not owed overtime, but that is a trick that your boss has played on you.
Yeah. So let's be clear and put some numbers on this. At the current overtime threshold, what is it, around $35,000 right now?
That. Yep.
Right. That is the equivalent of $17 an hour. So if you're making $35,000 a year salaried, that's all you're going to make, no matter how many hours they make you work. But let's say you're making $50,000 a year. That's about $24 an hour. Again, you're not going to get anything for that extra time. So when you look at it, it's in your employer's interest to say, look, you're such a great worker. We're going to, you know what? No more, $16.50 an hour for you. We're going to pay you the equivalent of $17 an hour. And we're going to call you an assistant manager. And oh, by the way, you've got new responsibilities. It's that prestigious manager. You need to open up the restaurant and close it. And you're going to have to spend, make sure everything. So it's going to be like 60 hours a week, but it's worth it because it's a path up the corporate ladder, which, I hate to break it to you, it probably isn't. But that's what they're going to tell you. And that is what has happened. And I can tell you an actual story. Some years ago when I was a reporter and I was covering that fast food strike, one of the workers I interviewed was telling me how she was fired from her job at a Hardee's. She was making $12 an hour, and the overtime threshold was lower back then. She was making $12 an hour, and they wanted to promote her to assistant manager, which she looked at it and she realized she'd make an extra 75 cents an hour. And she declined that promotion. So they fired her. That's the type of power that employers have. And that's, by the way, is why people just grit their teeth and allow it, because they think if they say no to these extra hours, they'll just lose their job. Over the past 40 years, people are now working longer hours for less money because really employers are stealing your time.
Absolutely. They're stealing your time and they're not compensating you for it. One of the other dynamics, of course, is that people, when they had that 40-hour cap, where you would run into it and your employer would say, hey, go home. I don't want to pay you time and a half. Guess what? You got to go home. You got to spend time with your family. You got to have extra activities. You got to do other things in your community. And that was good for the entire economy. Not only did it allow for people to go and take the job that was being created with your extra time. So rather than you doing it, they were going to have to hire somebody else to do it. But then you got to go home and be able to spend time with your family, be able to do extra activities, be able to be a volunteer in your community, any number of positive benefits. By taking that away and by telling you, because you're a salaried employee making over $35,000 a year, you now have to work overtime no matter what I say, and I'm not going to compensate you. It both robs your time. It also robs the community of the kind of time and energy you could put into the community. And of course, it steals a job out there.
Right.
Because somebody else could be doing that job during that
That's
extra, right?
If you had, two people working 60 hours a week, that's the same as three people working 40 hours a week. So you can figure it out when the average worker is working over 50 hours a week, or they report. Now, to be clear, they're not legally working over, and a lot of that is wage theft. It's not being reported, but when you do surveys and people count up how much time they're actually working, it's about 50 hours a week.
So here's the deal. We are sitting here today. Part of the reason we're talking about that is the Biden administration has come at this to lift up the overtime threshold from a very low mark of about 35,000. They're making it higher than
let's
that.
be clear about what that 35,000 means. Before, we said about 2/3 of salaried workers were covered. I think at the peak, it was like 68% of workers. Right now, it's around 10%. It had fallen to as low as 7%. It got bumped up a bit. It's about 10% of salaried workers that get time and a half. That means 90% of salaried workers, your boss can ask you to work extra, can say, no, you need to, could you stay in the office a couple hours extra today and tomorrow and the next day, and they don't have to pay you a penny more.
It's crazy. Think about it. You are working more than 40 hours for your boss to likely make them more profits, and you don't get any compensation. It's wholly unfair, and it really violates this core principle of the social contract that was set up under the New Deal. And thankfully, we are starting to get back to some balance in this country where workers are being compensated for their time. And if you're not compensated for your time, you should go home. Go and spend time with your family, your friends, do things.
Right.
That is okay. That is a principle that we need to get back to. It's better for workers and it's better for the economy because, as we were saying earlier, the good news is you would then, as an employer, have to hire somebody to do that job. And that is good for the economy. There, it means that we have more jobs in the economy, more productivity. It is good for what would be, at the end of the day, good for the economy. But here, let me tell you, Goldie, despite the fact that it's good for workers, despite the fact that it's clearly good for the economy, can you guess who's against this?
Business people?
Yeah, it turns out business people are pretty upset about this idea. So we have this new rule coming in place by this administration to lift this up, to finally get it back in line. It's not going to be close to what it was in the 70s, but it's a lot higher than what we have today. And it'll cover a lot, tens of millions more workers. And, the first people to squawk whenever we're going to do anything good for workers is the business community. And I don't know if if you've heard this one before, Goldie, but this will harm the very people it's intended to help.
Oh man, that's a new line. When did they come up with that one? Sometime in the mid 18th century.
So they are really saying there's a couple of lines of attack on this. One, it's going to harm the very people it's intended to help. Couple of ways it's going to harm them.
It's a job killer, isn't it?
It is a job killer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And, the worst thing, and what they say, it's going to lead to workers not being salaried. So they're effectively threatening you by saying, well, guess what? You're not going to be a salaried employee. You're going to be one of those lowly hourly employees because I won't be able to give you a promotion and a raise to get you into the salary category so that I can exploit you and get you to work for far more than 40 hours a week, which is the part that they leave out. So yeah, they're preying on people's sense of pride, understandable pride that they become a salaried employee. They may have a title that comes along with that. But what the employer is not telling you, they're only doing that because they want to exploit your labor and take your hours. That's the number one argument they're coming out with. And the second one, of course, is that it's going to destroy jobs in the economy and freedom and American pie. And those are the common things that come out when one of these regulations that help people get this kind of thing. So I don't think, my view is that these are pretty stale arguments against this. Most people understand that you should be getting a fair wage for hours worked. And if you're going to pay me a salaried employee, that's fine. That still means that if I'm working more than 40 hours a week, you owe me for my time. And that means you should either let me go so I can go home and you should hire somebody else to do the job, or you should be paying me time and a half.
Right. We want to go back to the way it was, where free time, the term free time, that was something you spent with family and friends instead of something you just gave to your employer for free.